Ever notice how the people with multiple mansions are the ones telling you homeownership is a trap? Funny how that works. You're scrolling through financial advice at 2 in the morning, barely able to afford your studio apartment, and some billionaire is explaining why renting is actually the smart move. He's saying this from his 4th property, by the way. So what's really happening here? Are the ultra-wealthy genuinely concerned about your financial well-being? Or is there something else at play? Imagine you're sitting across from someone worth $50 million, and they're passionately arguing that buying a house will destroy your financial future. They mention opportunity costs, liquidity, flexibility, all valid points, technically. Here's where it gets interesting. When wealthy people talk about homeownership being a bad investment, they're not wrong for themselves. They're just not talking about the same game you're playing. For them, a primary residence is dead capital. It's money sitting there, appreciating at maybe 5% annually, if they're lucky, when they could be getting 15 or 20% returns in private equity deals you've never heard of. That's their reality. But here's the thing they won't tell you. Their version of renting isn't your version of renting. When a billionaire rents, they're negotiating favorable terms, writing off expenses through an LLC, and maintaining maximum liquidity for their next acquisition. When you rent, you're literally paying someone else's mortgage while building zero equity. See the difference? The wealthy operate in a completely separate financial ecosystem. They have access to investment vehicles that require minimum buy-ins of $1 million or more. You don't. So when they say homeownership ties up capital, they mean it's preventing them from participating in deals that could double their money in 3 years. Meanwhile, you're choosing between building equity or making your landlord richer. Let's talk about the flexibility argument. Rich people love this one. They'll tell you renting gives you freedom to move, to chase opportunities, to stay nimble in a changing economy. Again, not technically wrong, just wildly disconnected from reality. When they move for an opportunity, it's because they're opening a second office in Monaco or buying a vineyard in Napa. When regular people move for opportunity, it's because rent went up $400 and they got priced out of their neighborhood. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The ultra-wealthy benefit financially from you renting. Who do you think owns those apartment complexes? Who's buying up single-family homes and converting them to rentals? It's not your neighbor saving up for retirement. Private equity firms and wealthy investors have poured billions into residential real estate over the past decade. They're actively competing with regular buyers, driving up prices, then turning around and renting those properties back to the same people they outbid. Now imagine you're one of these investors. Would you go on podcasts telling people that buying homes is a great wealth building strategy? Or would you maybe emphasize the risks, the maintenance costs, the lack of flexibility? The incentive structure writes itself. They profit when you rent. They profit when housing stays scarce. They profit when you believe homeownership is financially irresponsible. But let's be fair, there are legitimate scenarios where renting makes sense. If you're genuinely moving every 2 years for career advancement, buying might be foolish. If you're in an unstable financial situation, the flexibility of renting provides security. The problem is when blanket advice from the ultra-wealthy gets internalized as universal wisdom. It's not. For most middle-class families, a home is the single largest wealth-building tool they'll ever access. It's forced savings, it's inflation protection, it's something you can actually leave to your kids. Meanwhile, 30 years of rent payments leave you with a stack of receipts and maybe a good reference. That's it. Here's where the irony gets thick. These same wealthy advisors warning you about homeownership, they're buying real estate constantly. They're just buying it differently. Investment properties, commercial real estate, multifamily units. They understand real estate builds wealth, they just don't want competition for the properties they're acquiring. The narrative has shifted so dramatically that an entire generation now views homeownership as a boomer fantasy rather than a legitimate goal. Mission accomplished, really. Search any financial forum, and you'll find young people convinced that renting forever while investing the difference is the sophisticated choice. Sometimes it is. Often, it's just expensive rationalization. Because here's what the math actually shows. In most markets, over most time periods, owning beats renting for wealth accumulation. Not always, not everywhere, but generally, the calculations the wealthy use factor in opportunity costs you don't actually have access to. They assume investment returns you can't realistically achieve. They ignore the behavioral economics of forced savings. So what's the actual game here? It's simple. The ultra-wealthy want a rental class. They want a population that remains financially flexible, geographically mobile, and asset poor. It makes for excellent tenants and a stable investment thesis.